And we are live.
Thank you. Welcome to our September USDB Standing Committee. My name is Leanne Wood. I'm the chair of this committee and I represent District 4. We'll go ahead with our board member introductions. Vice Chair Booth, would you like to introduce yourself?
Thank you. I'm Randy Booth, representing District 13. That's Nebo and Provo City School Districts.
Thank you. Member Davis.
Good morning, Cindy Davis, and represent District 11, and happy to be here.
And Member Longacre, she's our new member of our committee. I think you were there last month for the first time, but we're glad to have you back. Go ahead and introduce yourself.
Yes, thank you. Still feeling new. I represent District 7, and just like Board Member Davis, I am happy to be here.
Thank you. And is Member Brenton on yet? Not seeing Member Brenton yet. I'll let her introduce herself when she gets here. All right, for our first, we have, I believe we do have public comment, Sarah Erb. And if, for those of you who are not speaking, if you'd like to turn off your camera, it just helps highlight the interpreter. Sarah, go ahead. Welcome.
Thanks so much. Good morning. My name is Sarah Erb. I'm a parent of a student who attends a public charter school in Salt Lake City. I live in Salt Lake City boundaries, but the charter school is not part of Salt Lake School District. I had a couple of concerns that I had about advisory council for USDB and some of the ways that the recordings are only, you had mentioned a couple of notes as you were prepping for this meeting, Board Member Wood, about just making sure that the public is able to participate, all the public that are stakeholders. Just a note that advisory council meeting recordings are only audio recordings, which is great for me. However, for those that might need access needs for ASL, because I know that there is ASL interpretation provided during those meetings, but it's not currently being available. The video is not available as a recording. So just kind of some housekeeping items with how USDB's advisory council and this standing committee. For this month, the public notice website wasn't updated, and so I wasn't aware of when the the notes and the agenda were posted. So I apologize that I didn't reach out until this morning to request to be on the agenda for public comment. In addition, neither the USDB board meeting or this standing committee meeting is available during times when we have stakeholders across the state that work in the field that would be able to otherwise attend if they were not working. So just would like to hear if in the future conversations regarding allowing the public to participate who work in the field, because if we cannot support our teachers, how can we support our students and hear directly from our teachers who provide the services for our students. Thanks so much for the work you're doing. It is not a small task, and we really appreciate you taking this responsibility very seriously because you know it affects so many of our families across the state. Thanks so much.
Thank you, Sarah. We always appreciate your feedback, and we'll look into those items. I know we're doing a deep dive into a lot of things of how USDB needs to move forward. So appreciate your time. Do we have any other public comment today? Okay, seeing none, we will move forward. Our first item on the agenda is 1.2 action item student-owned device policy. We'll have Superintendents Tanner and Patton speak to that. If you'd like to go ahead.
This is I went to go off mute. The screen took over and I couldn't push the button. All right, so you can see on the screen our policy for use of student-owned devices. there have been two model policies that were shared with us that we could look at. One was a more restrictive policy, and one that gave more freedom to students' use of cell phones in the classroom. We have chosen for the deaf side, it's going to be the more restrictive side of it, meaning we're not going to be giving them their phones in the classroom. You can see personal devices have to be powered off or set to silent or stored out of sight from the start of the day until dismissal. So for the deaf school, it's very important that our students are giving eye contact, looking at the teacher, they're engaged. Otherwise, they can't hear the communication that's going on in the classroom. So it can be very debilitating for the teacher to be able to teach when they're looking at their devices or on their devices. If they need to use it for some purpose, then the teacher can call it out, and have them use. But for the most part, on the deaf school side, we are trying to not have their cell phones available to them so that they are engaged with their eyes and interacting in the class and the lesson. It's slightly different on the blind side. So I'll let Susan speak to that.
Yes, thank you, Michelle. And if you'll scroll down, so it's pretty simple for the School for the Blind. Just opposite of what Michelle was talking about with the School for the Deaf, School for the Blind, we need to be teaching students how to use cell phones, or we will be using cell phones, and they do use the cell phones in their classes for assistive technology. However, we also have a very small number of students. We have 11 students there right now, and those students, so it's easy to monitor. So it's not like they have access to their phones all day long, but we wanted to make it broad so that we could use it for assistive technology instruction. And so that's going to be at the discretion of the director who will talk with the teachers, and it will be pretty much the teacher's direct discretion.
And that's our report.
All right. Do we have any comments on the policy from board members? Cindy or Member Davis?
Thanks. Can you help us know how extensive this situation is currently? I mean, do you have students who are on their phones often right now, or and then what's the what happens if they break these rules?
So Board Member Davis, I can answer for the School for the Blind. No, I asked our director of our high school program, of our secondary programs, our principal there, and she said they don't have a problem, and mainly because we have the low number of students that the teachers are monitoring, very a lot. And then when they are using their phone, it is for instructional purposes with assistive technology. So I can answer that easily for the School for the Blind.
Yeah. And so the School for the Deaf is very much like other schools throughout the nation, and in which the students are very attached to their phones. It's a way to communicate. We understand all the reasons that students give for why they want to have their phones, but there's also, as we've seen, lots of research on the health benefits, the mental health benefits of them being engaged in school, and we've seen a lot of data on that. And I know the Board of Education has talked about these policies, and that's why they were shared out, because it's a hot topic that people are having. But it is something that you really couldn't instruct a deaf student if they're literally looking at their phone. You literally cannot teach them because their eyes are not where they need to be. So it's good to have it aside. And of course, we, as you see in the policy, if it's an instructional need or it's an instructional purpose, then the teacher can pull them out and say, well, we'll use them. But it's been better with them out. There's been less hostility, I think, is the word I would use. That they get involved in something that upsets them online, and then that brings into the classroom. So it's been a good thing to not have that in the classroom.
May I follow up one last question, Chair?
Yes, please.
So when I talk to my kids and other kids in the neighborhood, they've been rolling out these kind of personal device policies, and they say, oh yeah, we rolled out a new policy this year, and in the summer they were all ready to be phone free, and now, a month into it, they say, well, not many enforce it. So yeah. I just wonder, are you planning any training for teachers of, how this will look, and providing some supports in that way. So teachers feel kind of empowered to enforce the policies. And then I'll turn my camera off now because that's my last question. Thank you.
So we did a training at the beginning of the school year with the teachers. So they were aware of this policy change and what was going on. So that happened. And the thing that's beautiful about USDB is because we have a smaller number, we can engage in the smaller classes. And so that is easy to reinforce and to be supportive of one another from class to class as they transition, because mostly it's high school, middle school students. So we have a smaller group of teachers than other districts have, where they have a large staff that we can monitor and support one another as we enforce those policies. And we do catch kids and we put it back in the locker. We're not, we talk to kids. The point of, I was telling my teachers that when a child makes an infraction, makes an error, the idea of discipline is to correct the behavior. So your idea is to teach. It's an opportunity to teach, and that's what we take it as, is an opportunity to teach why it is we don't do this and why it is we need to be engaged in the classroom. So that's our approach. We haven't had a problem with the students pushing back on it.
Appreciate that. Thank you.
Thank you, Member Davis. So yeah, I noticed on number 3.3, it says, or 3.2, the school may prescribe a method of storage outside of student control. Can you explain what you are doing for that storage? I know we've had different places where it's in the backpacks or in pockets or in locked up lockers. What is the school doing?
Right now we're putting them in lockers. So they're in their lockers when they get to school, and that's where they're supposed to be. I'm sure there may be a kid or two that tries to sneak it in their pocket, but right now they're in the lockers. And then if we wanted to, there are devices in which you can purchase, and some schools do, that it's like just a cell phone locker. And you come in, open it, you put your phone in, and the teacher only has the key. So that's describing those kind of storage outside of student control, because the teacher would have the key to get into that. We're not utilizing that right now, but it does give us the option if we chose to do that, if it became to be a real problem. But we haven't purchased anything to put them in something and lock them down.
Okay. So you've had no additional costs incurred at this point to move forward on this policy. Okay. Appreciate that. All right. Is there any other comments? And if not, I would be seeking a motion if someone would like to do that.
I'd be happy to.
Thank you, Member Davis.
I move that the committee review and approve the student-owned device policy and forward to the board on final approval.
We have a motion that the committee review and approve the student-owned device policy and forward to the board for final approval. Any comments to that? Seeing none, we'll go to a vote. All those in favor say aye.
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 Any opposed? Okay, that passes unanimously. Thank you. All right, I'm going to take chair's privilege here and change our agenda order, just because I think the audit may take up some time, and I'd like us to be able to get through that. For the public's benefit, there was an internal audit done by our USBE internal audit department, and that was released to the public during our USBE board meeting on this last Thursday. And so there are some recommendations throughout the policy. What I'd like to do as the committee is walk through those recommendations and kind of come up with some kind of an action plan where whose role is it to identify where we go from here. What I'm hoping in the end is that we will have some very specific items that as a committee needs to come back to us for deeper dive, more information, how to improve the situation. Some of it, of course, will already be going to our director, to our operations department with finances, but I'd love to have really an open discussion here about some of the things that we're seeing and how we can now, move things. We can progress to a better spot. So I've asked our interim superintendent Hart, to walk us through that, and if she's willing to do that. But please raise your hand, comment. Superintendents, if you have comments on this, I'd love this to be more of an open discussion as we figure out where we go next. There's been a lot of work done on USDB this summer, and hopefully by the end of this year, we have a great path moving forward of what's going to be best for our students and educators there at USDB. So, Superintendent Hart, any comments to that?
Sure. First, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Great. I'm away. I'm out of town, so I'm on a sketchy Wi-Fi. Yes, we are excited to get the audit because the audit helps us determine the path forward. One of the things, first, it's hard to know where to start, right? It's almost like a merry-go-round, and at what point do you jump on, and things are connected. But I will just use the structure of the audit. First, the organizational structure. We really need to determine how USDB is structured. Of course, because it is it's got multiple components, because it's throughout the state. We definitely need to be clear about what that structure looks like. It's like a skeleton for a body, right? We need the strength of our structure. So when we're talking about residential services, we're talking about campus services, we're talking about outreach services, what does that look like? Where are the goals and the what are the component parts? We need a clear strategic plan. Now, a decision point is, do we cascade from the USBE strategic plan? Do we have a strategic plan for USDB that both schools then cascade from? So that's one decision point. Are you, Chairwood, are you wanting to pause and discuss each main topic, or are you wanting to do an overview first?
I think do an overview on this page, and then as we move to page 57, it goes into those much deeper recommendations.
Okay.
And I think
Okay,
that would be the great. So if we kind of look at these 4 areas of
yes,
main, and then move to
perfect.
57 and start working through those very
Perfect.
specific items, that would be great.
Excellent. So then the audit addressed competency, accountability, and metrics for all the areas of the school. They noticed compliance, operations, policy, data, but also performance metrics, and I would include student data in there as well, both counts, but also how our students are doing. And then the third area is policy, and making sure that we have all the required policies of an LEA, of a local education agency, and making sure that all reports are being compiled and submitted per code. And then the fourth area is data and funding. It needs to obviously be accurate. That's a concern across our education systems right now. Just making sure that we are transparent with who we serve, and in what way, and making sure parents and community stakeholders all know exactly what the public education system is doing for the children of Utah. So those are the 4 overall areas. So it really is data and first planning, but then following through the plan with competency and accountability, and making sure all the way through we have good data, and then also just making sure we're maintaining structure. So that overall, that's the buckets the recommendations were in.
Great. Let's move to page 57. And then as we work through this, so our internal audit department recommended their plan. They always do a who, what, how, evidence, and the timetable. So if we work through, we may not get through all of this, but if we could look at who's going to actually manage whatever the recommendation is. It might be, the superintendency with USDB. It might be the superintendency with USBE. It might be the board decision that comes through the committee as a filtering and improving. And so any recommendations you have in that way also, or any board members, if they have any recommendations. And if I miss hands, please let me know. I just realized that I had turned off the participants so I could see so if I miss them, please let me know. All right, go ahead. Thank you.
Sure. So under organizational structure and related entities, the first thing that was noted is concerns about the advisory council and making sure that the advisory council meets as they are prescribed to meet in rule and code. One thing to note is making sure that the role of the advisory council as the school community council, there are a number of requirements there. They are very clear, and the school, the land trust organization has very clear, lots of support and clear expectations. That is something that should be done at the USDB level. It should stay as close to the level of service providing, as close to the student level as possible. That's the backbone of land trust, and I think that should be honored. That one to me is somewhat of an easy one. It would be hard to argue that the responsibility for that would be at a USBE level. Does that make sense?
It does. Do you think that there's any benefit to reviewing our board policy?
Yes, I actually believe that once we get through the audit, and once people have had time to absorb the recommendations, I think that we should look at both the what's in rule for the advisory council and what's in code for the school community council, and make sure that those are complementary rather than conflicting or not misleading, because that sounds like somebody's trying to do something not right, but just make sure that they complement each other.
Perfect. Thank you. Any comments on the advisory council? And board members, I really would love your input and feedback on this, so please speak up. Superintendent Patton.
Yeah, I just have a question as far as feedback that you're wanting. I'm a little confused, and I admit that that's not abnormal, but I'm just a little confused as far as feedback. What kind of feedback are you wanting to engage in a discussion? Does that make sense? Like, so because I think that there's are you wanting like what is happening or what the real thing is happening right now, or the not the necessarily the real thing, but what is happening that we see, or how would you like that to go, Board Member Wood?
I think it's really high level.
Okay.
Is this something that needs a deeper dive to look at? And I would ask from your expertise, like, would you like to see further input from the committee or the board? Is more direction required so that, you know, if we hadn't.
So Michelle and I are fine to say whether we think, even though we're not part of course, the board.
I'd like some feedback if you think that things are, you know, as we've looked at, you know, as I've attended those meetings for 2.5 years, making sure that watching what's happened with the foundation, some of those things that are happening with some of the grants that are being provided. Like, are we making sure that the rubrics are in place? Are those things? That's not the discussion for today's meeting, but does it need to be a discussion for further meetings? Is that helpful?
Yes, that is. And so I would like to add that I agree that there should be, that we need to look, that needs to be looked into. The board or the advisory council, I think, over the last year, possibly might feel, I don't know this about every member, but might feel that they don't have the same authority that they have had in the past. And that, you know, they are stakeholders that are really truly in the weeds of the blind community and the deaf community, and their input is invaluable. And, you know, just over the years with the foundation, I think that that's kind of gotten a little bit muddied as far as what maybe some things are being funded through enrichment funds, others are being funded through the foundation. I think that it's really a great idea, and I was glad that came out in the audit, that we do need to be more specific as far as the role of the advisory council, and really make it or make sure that they know that they are defined as one of the governing body that is very valuable.
Great, thank you. Member Davis. Oh, sorry. We go to Member Davis and then Superintendent Hart.
I'm happy to listen to Superintendent before.
Okay.
So the way I was kind of in my mind is it's almost a checklist, and the checklist is it something that we can do as USDB administration? Is it something that we can do, but we need additional support to do? Or does it need to go out to be considered by the board or by the committee or by the working group, you know, that kind of thing. In terms of the advisory council, I think it is very telling that it is the school community council. And and that's what I also heard in the superintendent's comments as well. When it's considered the school community council, that is a tremendous, they have a lot more say than what is in currently our rule for the advisory council. And it is very clear how they lead. So by following the school community council guidelines, then we would be giving that very clear authority and say to the advisory council. So I want to be very clear. I think that advisory council should be given more access, more voice. And I think the method of doing that is making clear that we use the school community council structure, and then we line our policy up, our board policy up with that accordingly. So yes, I agree 100%, and that advisory council is a gem for the USDB.
Thank you. So Member Davis and then Member Booth.
Thank you. I think the question that I think we need to answer first when we go through each of these recommendations, and I read pages 57 through the end again this morning before we met, and was asking myself this question really is, what is a successful outcome? And I know that our charge in this meeting is to have kind of a general high level, where do we want more information now to start looking, which group needs to look at this or do something. But I think for us to be able to answer that, and Superintendent Hart just beautifully framed this by saying who is going to do what, I think we need to answer and ask ourselves this question with every single one of these. What is a successful outcome to this group? What would it look like to us? And that's how we'll know what to recommend. My question specifically on this piece. The advisory council, and I remember that we did this because they weren't necessarily outlined as a school community council, but yet we're acting as the school community council because we had campuses all over, and there were just some extenuating circumstances with why we had to do this. But my question is to this group is, what does success look like in this space? Because when I hear advisory council, I hear a general advisory council may make suggestions for any type of fund use or policy issues, and that they are just advising and giving recommendations to be received by USDB and by our board. When I hear school community council, I hear a very specific set of funds that this group has the say over how those are spent. So I just think we need to figure that out. And then also this, I'm embarrassed to admit that I should have known this all along, but why is the foundation receiving donations and the advisory council receiving donations? And is the advisory council, because there's a suggestion here that we combine the accounts. To my knowledge, donations in all of our other LEAs are received through the foundation. So what internal controls do we have around the donations that are coming into the advisory council? And are there legal problems, or are we legally kosher there? And what do we need to, what would success look like for us? And who do we need to get more information from to consider combining those two accounts? And can we really do that? I mean, it seems like then the advisory board would advise, but the foundation would be receiving the donations. But I see lots of hands up and some nodding heads, so maybe some people can answer my questions. Thank you, Chair.
All right, Member Booth, do you want to let someone speak to her questions first, or do you have a comment on this?
My comment is very simple. I just speak to the need for us to streamline and clarify and begin to recognize that what has been happening in LEAs across the state, what has developed over the years, is a system of governance with specific groups of people who have responsibilities, and it's been working for the most part. And this organization has had a separate set of organizational structures, and as it begins to fit more and more into the public education realm, I think it would be a good idea to pull some of these things together so that they really do have a school community council. And I don't know where the advisory council would fit in a normal LEA, whether it's you know, the foundation committee or something that's that would be what we would find in a local LEA. But I really would vote heartily and wholeheartedly to try to streamline, clarify, define the roles and let them function in the ways that have already been proven to be effective for decades now in just a normal public education realm. So those are my thoughts at the moment.
Thank you. Superintendent Patton, and then we'll go back to Superintendent to conclude this section.
Thank you. I just wanted to clarify as far as my understanding is concerned, and it's in response to Board Member Davis's comment. The combination of the enrichment funds or the funds that the advisory council oversees, that when they're talking about the combination, again, my understanding is that the combination of the School for the Deaf and the School for the Blind enrichment funds, not the foundation funds and the advisory council funds or the enrichment funds. To my knowledge, the advisory council does not distribute donated funds. That's only the foundation. The advisory council are the ones that approve those enrichment activities that are funded through the enrichment program. Does that help? So the education and the advisory council's funds shouldn't be, and I'm not sure that they were not, that's not what I'm saying, but they shouldn't be combining. It should be enrichment funds for the advisory council. Foundation are those donated funds.
May I follow up, Chair?
Yes, please.
So, yes, it makes sense what you're saying to me, Director Patton, but I am not sure that the audit is saying the same thing. I'm looking, yeah, so I'm looking in the chat, and our Chief Executive Auditor here is saying that the Advisory Council is to provide recommendations to the board on use of enrichment funds and also the donated funds, which would be the foundation funds. But
There is another. There is another. Also, right? There's also another donated funds bucket.
Right.
Yeah, that's what I'm asking. We have enrichment funds that are also donated?
So, there's the donated funds that were years ago, and I'm speaking from my own perception of things. I want that to be clear that this might not be what the audit has found. I'm just speaking of what in my perception of what has happened in the past. Divisions had their own donated pots of money that like deafblind might have had a certain amount of money, or there could have been donated funds that were given to specific divisions. Several years ago, that money was taken, was not necessarily taken, but it was combined into one donated funds account. There was only a couple of those that were left within those divisions. Though that became USDB's full donated funds account. Those are different than the enrichment funds or the foundation funds. So there's actually the three. There's the donated account, the foundation account, and then the enrichment account. And Michelle is really welcome her input on this as well. So in my experience, the advisory council has not distributed or approved money from the donated accounts. It's only been the enrichment funds that they have donated or that they have approved for different enrichment activities.
Okay, so what we're seeing again is kind of that clarification.
Yes, exactly.
And I would hope that we don't get into a lot of the weeds today, because that's where we're showing the need to dive into things deeper.
And that was with the audit. So that was a good thing as far as that was identified as one of the confusions. So anyway, that's all I have.
Yeah, and if our policy is saying that the advisory council is supposed to do that, but they've never done that, is our policy wrong, or is there a problem with the way the buckets are? So Superintendent Hart, I'm going to turn this back to you.
So many of these things just just kind of flow together. And when you're talking about a strategic plan, and then an operational plan, you're, you get into the different funds and the school land trust funds, donated funds. So I think in my view, what needs to happen is a step back that, and instead of, like you saying, getting into the weeds. So a strategic plan on what the goals and the pillars are for USDB. Then once you have that plan, you then feed in all of your resources, whether it's school land trust, whether it's donated funds, whether it's um, uh, or any version of donated funds, and then you figure out each of those pieces, what falls underneath. So you've got to have this high level, what you're trying to accomplish as an organization, and then you feed in all of your plans underneath, or your sources of funding or your resources to meet that overall plan. The USDB does not have a plan, and so therefore these pieces parts feel very disparate, and that's what happens. I personally would like to consider a name change to the advisory council, because I'm not sure that reflects what the advisory council does. I think that it's not only serving as a school community council, but it has a broader set of responsibilities that come from different directions, donated funds being one of them. But then you have to figure out the difference between what sits with your foundation, which is, for lack of a better word, but semi-autonomous, and what actually, what funds are decided by the advisory group, or more internal to the agency. So you've got to create the structure first, and then you have to staff your structure, and then you have to figure out how the pieces parts play into that. And it's like, a school, on a school level, you have, many LEAs have their foundations, but schools also accept donations from other organizations, like might have a PTA, they might have parents that just walk in and say, look, I work for so-and-so company, and my company wants to donate a case of headphones. And so you do have different ways that donations come into an organization, but figuring out this advisory council and then the foundation and the donated funds is going to be predicated on setting up the skeleton, which is the overall plan, and then having subsets, having plans that cascade underneath it. So while we can talk about advisory and foundation and then, accountability, you can't really talk about them separately until you have that strategic plan put together, where you have your overall, your mission, your vision, the pillars or goals that you've set. And then there's an adage that is, you fund your plan, you don't plan for funds. And I think that's what's gotten USDB into a little bit of trouble, because as funds come in, historically, they're then utilized, but they're not utilized to fund a plan. they're brought in and it's been flipped. Does that make sense at all? So I'm really advocating for a strategic plan first, and that's that organizational structure, to then determine what do we need an advisory council to do? What do we need a foundation to do? Because we can't determine what a foundation does or doesn't do until we know what the organization is prioritizing at the very highest levels.
I appreciate the direction you're coming from. I do think also, though, there needs to be some of the weeds of these things.
Yes, and I can
before, I mean, and maybe we can do these simultaneously, but when paperwork isn't properly filed, you know, when the foundation is dissolved,
yes.
there's a lot of the weedy things that I would like to know, and I don't know who directs this, is what role does the board have in this? As I listened to a June 14th, 2022, the USDB presented to the legislature in public ed appropriations. And one of the questions was very specific to the foundation, and they alluded to the fact that it was a private 501c3, so there wasn't a lot of oversight that USDB could provide for that. However, the audit points out that it is funded by taxpayer money. So who has the actual oversight of that if the executive director is funded by taxpayer money?
That would
Does it ultimately come down to you as the superintendent?
It's joint between, well, yes, it does, as long as the board gives the superintendent that authority. Potentially, the Education Foundation could also have oversight directly to the board, although I don't necessarily know that that's advisable. But right now, for Education Foundation, and I think Assistant Superintendent Jacobson is on, she can speak way more eloquently. I believe the foundation has been reinstated, and we now need to move forward. And I see that as part of my responsibility to update the bylaws, review the bylaws, and then and create the tracking mechanism that is necessary and present that to the board. So because another piece of information that I think is important is, as we figure out what the governance structure is of USDB, I'm moving forward as if, because that's my role as interim, but I'm also trying to be careful and mindful that this is being reimagined by the board. The first thing that I wanted to do, and I had it added to the audit committee, is a request for a consultancy project that our audit team, if it's prioritized by the board and if the board adds it to the audit plan, the audit team who did this audit can help us at USDB set up an internal control system. And so that will be considered at the next audit meeting. That will put an auditor as a resource, as a consultant, to help us define internal control systems for not just USDB, but all, but USDB, the foundation, the advisory committee, all actions of USDB. So that's one of the first steps, and it touches on every one of these recommendations. We have to have a system of internal controls to manage for risk, and that will address so many of these bullet points. Now, it remains to be seen if the board will allow our audit staff to work in that capacity. If it's not deemed, if it's not approved, then I need to look at adding an internal controls staff member. You can't have an organization this size without an internal control system.
Superintendent, or I guess, sorry, I'm not remembering your title, but Jacobson, Deborah Jacobson. Can you tell me how foundations work in traditional LEAs? Does the board have any oversight in those at all?
No, foundations are typically legally separate from their entity. There's usually, and all LEAs, foundations all kind of operate a little bit differently. Some actually hire their staff that are paid out of the foundation. Some the actual LEA actually pay for, but there's an agreement between the LEA and the foundation board. But typically the foundation board is usually the ones responsible for all of the funding. Is that kind
Yeah, that's helpful. I just, as we look at this internal controls and systems set up, just listening to that legislative guidance where there's a division there, I think we need to be very clear on where we're going with that. So I appreciate that feedback, and remind me of your title so that I don't mess up next time.
Assistant Superintendent of Operations.
Thank you. Okay, I was going to say superintendent, and then I'm like, wait a minute, there's another layer there. Sorry. All right, Superintendent Hart, let's move to competency and accountability.
Wait.
Oh, sorry, do you have your, sorry, I didn't see your hand, Cindy. I apologize.
Yeah, I have been asking for that as well. I love what Superintendent Hart said about, I feel like we need an internal controls coach to help for these first few months get some of our internal controls in place based on some recommendations from the audit. And then I guess I have a question for you, Chair Wood. I just threw a potential motion. Are you looking for a motion potentially from each of these areas that we're going through? And so before I move on, do you want a motion, or do you want us just to support or the ask to get an internal controls person to help coach through this process? What was your thought when you started the meeting?
I made it an action item specifically that if board members felt there were areas that we needed to have specific direction in, we could do that accordingly.
So before I actually make the motion that I put in the chat, would it be appropriate for me to ask board members, is this something that you feel is getting too much into the weeds, or would this information be helpful when we come back to next meeting to start thinking about this along with what Superintendent Hart is putting into place with having an internal controls coach there? And do we need a motion to support that ask, or just to support that direction of having a person to support with internal controls?
I think the motion gives guidance. So if you'd like to read your motion, we'll put it out there, and then we can discuss it and get input from other board members. But I think it does give some good guidance.
Okay, I move that the committee asks staff to bring back information on A, the role of advisory board, and if it follows SCC guidelines, will it narrow or enlarge the scope? And B, what logistical and policy changes need to be made to address audit recommendations to combine accounts and define responsibilities of the advisory board and the foundation?
Thank you. So we have that motion forward that the committee asks staff to bring back information on A, role of advisory board, and if it follows SEC guidelines, will it narrow or enlarge the scope? B, what logistical and policy changes need to be made to address audit recommendations to combine accounts and define responsibilities of the advisory board and the foundation. Do we have any discussion on this? And I noticed, Member Booth, your hand went down. I didn't know if that was fixing it from earlier or if you had some comments. Sorry,
I was just fixing it from earlier. Sorry.
do you have any comments to this motion?
I think it's a good idea. I would like to clarify and move a step closer to being able to make some good decisions that will streamline and make our work more effective with the advisory board.
Okay. And I think, okay, Dr. Tanner.
I was just going to make, I think, what would be a friendly amendment to her motion, or just not that I'm making amendments, but I'm just saying to give some feedback. I think actually asking to combine accounts should be stricken because you don't know what recommendations. There's a lot of other recommendations in here. I would say what logistical policy changes need to be made to address audit recommendations and define the responsibilities of the advisory council and the foundation. That would be mine. So because instead of making a recommendation of what that means, let the process work.
Just may I follow up, Chair?
Yes.
I would be fine with that if I misunderstood what I read in the audit report. I thought they were suggesting combining two specific accounts. Am I remembering that wrong?
No, it does. It does. And I think your motion does, address those. It doesn't say do it. It just says what would happen if I think that's the logistical part of it. So I think you're accurate. And it did ask in that on page 57, there was a direct recommendation to combine accounts. So,
but let me also say to Director Tanner that I really appreciate the feedback, because I think what I'm hearing you say is that there are a lot of other recommendations or accounts or things that might need to be in, and we may need to address those additional ones as we go through each other section.
Broaden it.
But for this specific one, because we're trying to not get too far into the weeds, but also narrow down a little bit, I think we'll look at these two first, if that's okay. Unless
we can come back on that. I just thought, my thought was that if we could broaden it, because there could be other recommendations that may be addressed in it. That's all. My thought was being more broad instead of there's lots of recommendations. There's lots in here. So anyway.
Well, what we could do is just say, what logistical and policy changes need to be made to address audit recommendations let's then change the word to including combining accounts. And then we can address other recommendations, but it would definitely include the combination of the accounts and what that would look like.
Yep, that'd be fine.
Perfect. All right. I am not seeing any hands. Let's move ahead to a vote. All those in favor of the committee asking staff to bring back information on the role of the advisory board, and if it follows SEC guidelines, will narrow or enlarge the scope, and what logistical and policy changes need to be made to address audit recommendations, including combining accounts and defining responsibilities of the advisory board and the foundation. All those in favor say aye.
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 Any opposed? Okay, thank you. And I appreciate
I have
that.
another one.
Great. I appreciate it.
Before I make the motion, I guess it feels a little atypical, but I would like it to be known on public record that this committee supports having some internal controls coaching for, whether it comes through CAE, Davis in her group, or superintendent hires with some FTE, or however that looks, those different pathways were mentioned by her. But I'd like to make a formal motion that we support that direction.
So this would be that the committee recommends that the board support the superintendent's request for a consultancy from audit to help develop internal control systems for USDB.
You worded that beautifully. And well, no ifs. I would like to move that, or you can, since you did all the words.
I want to make sure that does, Sir Superintendent Hart, does that do what you, would that be helpful to get that support from this committee?
That is one of the top 3 things that needs to happen in order for USDB to move forward. Yes.
Agreed.
So do we need, so the committee, but we need to take that message to the board so that the committee recommends to the board to support.
Is it possible to have that considered in the September 11th meeting, or is that too soon? Because if not, we have to wait till October. It's more than 24 hours.
It's going to be on the audit committee's agenda for Thursday. The audit committee hasn't seen it yet.
So we'll still have to go to October
Okay.
from audit.
That seems like a long wait, but they could probably start helping in the interim. Even if it wasn't formal.
We've got some other things we're working on.
Thank you.
Okay. So does our committee recommend to audit then? Instead of the board?
No, I think it would be the board, and then the 2 would go together.
Okay. So you can pass, if this passes, you can take that message to audit, but we will take it from our committee to the board. Okay, any comments to this? I'm not seeing any hands. We'll move to a vote. There's a motion that the committee recommends to the board to support the superintendent's request for a consultancy from the USBE internal audit section to help develop internal controls for USDB. All those in favor say yes.
Yes.
That's
Any opposed? Okay, that motion passes unanimously. Any others, Member Davis?
No, ma'am. I'm ready to move on.
Thank you. All right, we'll move on to the next section of accountability and competency and accountability. We could share back to the audit.
Yes, going back to the audit, you'll see, and this is kind of what it was foreshadowing. You see the list here, the bulleted list: policy, financial, data, records, personnel, trust, distribution, risk management, and use of state systems. This goes right, this whole thing could be called internal controls and will be encompassed in an internal control system in conjunction with a strategic plan formulation. So taking the strategic plan and taking an internal control system, you then provide the structure needed for all of these things to happen. And I'll save policy for next because that's the next cascading item. But if you look at financial management, data and records management, personnel, and on down, that's what you establish in your control environment. And because you have the goals set as part of your strategic plan, you then you take those goals. They inform the internal control system that you set up, and then your accountability flows from there, and that is where you tie in your performance measures. So your performance measures are then an outgrowth of your strategic plan in your internal control environment, creates your accountability measures that we then send to the legislature as the USDB performance measures. So that's how this whole thing works together elegantly. you have to have those parts in order to do these things. The one that they did pull out is the policy development, and I'll speak about that later. But with your data and records and your personnel, especially your personnel, once you know what it is that you're trying to accomplish, then you line up everybody's personnel management, their goals, their check-ins, their metrics. It's all lined up to meet the goals of the organization. I just, in getting into the USDB and really inspecting things, we've got a, a whole bunch of amazing individuals serving students. It's a little bit haphazard. It's like when you plant tomatoes and you don't realize you need a tomato cage. And once you realize you need a support, a frame, then all of a sudden your tomatoes are thriving and your yields are multiplying. Can you grow tomatoes without a tomato frame? Sure. Are you going to meet are you going to get your best tomatoes, your best yield? No. So apologies for the analogy, but we really, I cannot stress enough the structure that has not been present. We've had a lot of pieces, parts, and a lot of people doing very good things, but we haven't brought it together in that cohesive whole and subject it to an internal control environment that can control for risks and that can report out. So B is handled by having the strategic plan and the internal control environment.
Is there anything in that list that you see would be directly related to the role of the board?
No.
Okay.
That
I
is
didn't really either. I saw
Yeah.
it more as the
role of the board would be to empower the leadership of the organization to do it. So what the board will have to decide is what they want, who they want doing that. So there is a role, and it is the board is going to have to come to some agreement on who has that authority to move forward.
So from that end, are we in a good place? Has the law change that put USDB in done good things for us, or has it in some ways created further confusion
I'll
in the fact that USDB is an entity under us, a subdivision under us, but they are also an autonomous LEA. There's a little bit of confusion there, which may be a board role to request legislative change to clarify that role better.
Yes, at the risk of, I'm going to speak honestly, and the board may be a little uncertain about the authority, what is the authority and what isn't the authority. What was put into law is that it's under USBE, which means it's under the state superintendent, which means it has all the benefits of USBE, the agency side. What that puts in question is is there a need or how does the board interface with USDB? Does that position not exist, the separate superintendent, or does it exist but it's under the state superintendent? Those are decisions that the board has to decide with legislature. There's pieces, parts to both of those still in legislature. It's not totally clear. So yes, that will need to be clarified. And quite frankly, this work will go at the pace that the board is comfortable with it. So, you know, the sooner that decision, those decisions can be made. Now, people can say, you know, well, the legislature may choose something different. That is true, but there's a heck of a lot of work that could be done in between now and then.
Yeah, can we quickly move to, so whoever's sharing, can you go to le.utah.gov quickly and go to the 2025 legislative session? And I believe it's Bill 537. Could be off my numbers. Right there. I just want to read this as we go through this. Those very first lines, it's lines 30 and 31 and 32. The Utah Schools for the Deaf and the Blind is created as a subdivision of the state board and a single public school agency. That is the major conflict that we have here in how we work together between that management body. How much of it we take over, or USBE as the agency takes over, versus how much they have, in my opinion.
Yeah, and if you go down, you can see that it repeats it again. It says subdivision of the state board. The state board, and then it lists what can happen to the state board. Yeah, it then it needs clarification, but at the same time, like I said, there are a lot of good things we can do in between now and when we might have clarity. I sometimes worry that we get in the way of ourselves, and we can be making improvements. There's no need to wait. It doesn't matter how it exactly looks, for instance, to introduce an internal control environment to the organization. That now, because I'm doing the same thing in the state agency, if I'm allowed to mirror those processes, they're simply, I think it's strength in number almost. So because I'm working on the same thing within the agency, if we do it also at USDB, it can be more seamless. So that's just a consideration. We don't need to other USDB in any way because they are a subdivision.
Thank you. All right, there's some language. Member Davis, would you like to speak to the language in the chat?
Sure. I will do the first one, and then I'll do the second one separately because it actually does pertain to the strategic plan, I believe. But first, I move that staff bring the committee recommendations for additional work on the strategic plan, including A, people who should be involved, B, the budget needed, and C, a timeline.
Okay, we have a motion that staff bring the committee recommendations for additional work on the strategic plan, including people involved, budget needed, and the timeline. Any discussion to that? I think that's also partial to understand, do we cascade, as Superintendent Hart said, off of the USBE, or are they completely separated? That's part of a discussion too, right?
Yes, absolutely. And that really speaks to the next motion also. If we want to make the motion, I'm also wondering if we can do this internally, the next one. But for this one, certainly, you know, the people involved would be, there really needs to be a decision if it's going to cascade as a department and arm of strategic plan off of USBE, or if it's going to be a separate strategic plan on its own. And I really think a lot of these discussions are going to be had probably with Superintendent Hart and Deputy Superintendent Jones, because they've both kind of been given responsibilities under this new umbrella. But
Superintendent Hart,
that's as
I
much
might
as I'll
ask
say
you,
about the strategic plan, because I felt like we left it hanging too much last time when we didn't move anyway on the strategic plan. And I think we at least need to get information on the process we expect moving forward to get to a place where we can have a strategic plan.
Superintendent Hart, do you feel that the work group has any role in this direction in terms of cascading individual?
So, that is a good question. It goes back to what were the intended outcomes of the work group. And so I would have to be reminded of exactly why the work group was set up, in order to figure out whether that would be an appropriate piece of the scope.
Yeah, and unfortunately, I think we narrowed the role of the work group too much. Having worked through it this summer, we narrowed it to the questions asked of us by PEA and EAC, and I think it limited us in some ways.
It did. However, I recall there being some governance questions in there.
Yes.
So I think it's worth a look. I just don't have them in front of me to answer right off the bat.
Okay. Yep. Sorry to put you on the spot.
No. That's
okay.
A great question.
I am not seeing any hands from board members, so we will go ahead and vote on this. The motion is that staff bring the committee recommendations for additional work on the strategic plan, including A, people involved, B, budget needed, C, timeline. All those in favor say aye.
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 Any opposed? Okay, that passes unanimously. Member Davis.
Just to clarify on that last motion, my thought about people involved in whoever's involved with the strategic plan, it could be members of that work group or members of this committee or just agency members, or, those are all the questions that they can really flesh out and we can decide once we kind of see the landscape that comes back.
Okay.
So my next motion is probably going to be subject to committee discussion, and we'll have to figure out if this is really what we want to move forward or if we want to add an additional piece. So I'll just throw it out there. I move that the committee recommend that board leadership and staff work with the legislature to clarify lines 31 to 32 in code.
Okay, there's a motion that the committee recommend that board leadership and staff work with the legislature to clarify lines 31, 32 from HB 37, 2025 in code.
And may I speak to the motion?
Yes, please.
So, we keep saying even down to who appoints the superintendent now, and does the superintendent appoint, who under that, and we're pointing back to these lines in code saying, well, there's a part, the USDB is a part of the agency of USBE, but yet it is its own LEA. I personally think that can exist in code, but maybe we need to do some clarification, and maybe a legal consultant, I don't know if we have any of our AAGs on this call, could help us know, but could we have the legal authority to delineate some things with who does what? I think we're really looking at kind of its own agency status plus being an arm under our USBE. So can we figure that out, or do we need the legislature to clarify these lines in code? Is my question before we vote on this. Maybe we could discuss or get some legal or audit or expert opinions.
We do have AAG bill on here, AAG Bill, are you willing to speak to this matter? It's kind of working through those code lines that I already showed. I'm seeing her. Are you here, Assistant Attorney General Bill?
I will text her.
Okay, yeah, maybe see. I don't actually see who, because of the screen share. I'm trying to manage 3 screens, so I may be missing her. So, so do we want to clarify the lines? I guess I will ask some further clarification from the maker of the motion. Do we want to clarify the lines, or do we want the legislature to clarify the lines?
It just says to work with the legislature the legislature. Well, really, this is the question. Do we want to work with the legislature to change language in code to clarify, or do we want to just take what's already in code and clarify it ourselves and get it into board rule?
I guess I would say we probably need to decide what we want and then determine if that needs legislative change. So just like you're saying, I think we should take the language ourselves to
I
them.
totally agree.
I think we decide how we need it to go. So do we need to? What do you think of that? That the staff to propose language to the legislature to clarify lines 31 and 32?
I think that's fine, but my question for AAG Bill remains is, if we don't do this through the legislature, do we have the legal authority to just do it in board rule? I mean, they've already said, look, they're under USBE, but they're also, an entity. So those two have to be able to legally coexist. Our confusion has not necessarily been that. Our confusion has been who is going to do what, who has the power, so to speak, or the authority to do different things.
So this is, or would it be an or at the end? Or to determine
Probably.
Whether we have, or to clarify through rule, if allowed, or
Yeah, I texted AAG Bill, but if she comes back, she might be able to let us know during this meeting. But if not, we can leave it with that language.
I'm back. I apologize, but I missed the question.
Oh, that's okay. We were saying we are considering moving that the committee recommends board leadership and staff to work with the legislature to clarify lines 31 to 32 in code, which makes USDB under the USBE, but also still has the language in it that they're a separate entity. Or I don't think separate is the right word, but it's a subdivision of the USBE, but also a single public school agency. So our question is, these two things can coexist, in my opinion, but the question that keeps arising is who has the authority to do what? Is it the board, or is it the for example, whomever the long-term superintendent will be? We're in an interim situation right now, but is it the superintendent? So do we have the authority to just clarify these things in board rule? Or do we need to go back in and have code changed to answer this discussion or question?
Let me pull. There's another statute that I'm thinking of that gives a little bit more clarity, but I do think, I think your motion would be in line for that clarity. Let me see if I can find the code that I'm thinking of, though, specifically. It might take me just a moment here.
And I would recommend, Member Davis, on your motion that it be the board and staff, that the board proposed language.
That's fine.
Okay.
I wrote it that way first and then went back and changed it because sometimes we often direct staff to work with the legislature. And so I think do I want to do a hybrid here or what?
I think it's important that the board weigh in on this. Just given conversations that have occurred lately, there's a lot of feelings about how we move forward.
That's fine.
And but anytime you put board leadership, that seems to give us some undue influence that we don't have.
Yeah.
Right.
So 53E-8-204 does provide that the state board shall make rules in accordance with Administrative Rulemaking Act regarding, they determine necessary, establish committees, policies, processes necessary to the function and oversight of the Utah schools for the deaf and the blind. You guys definitely have some statutory authority to, establish those policies and processes for the function of USDB.
So do you think because if as long as we're putting them under us, with director operations, all of that, but we're still allowing some of that autonomy in the rule, we would be aligning with code, but still able to clarify. Is that what you're seeing through that statute?
That is how I would read it, yes.
Okay. What direction would you like to go, Member Davis?
What I'm hearing you say, AAGBL, is that we can do this on our own. We don't need to go to the legislature. We can take what they've already said and then just decide who's doing what within what they've said.
I would say so, because it says it's created as a subdivision of the state board and a single public school agency. But then it also says that the board shall, establish the committees, the policies and processes for the function and oversight. So I think you have the authority as it stands to kind of put those pieces in place.
What if we went backwards and we clarified in rule, but we maintained the motion that we work with the legislature if necessary? If we come to find that we feel like it's still not clear enough, that there can be some wiggle room, which is what I think has caused us too many issues over the last few years, is a lot of wiggle room, that we change if necessary. Would that be an acceptable amendment?
Yes, if I may, Chair. I was going to say we just move forward and do it on our own, and then when it comes to full board, we move it to clarify with the legislature if we can't seem to come up with the right language on our own. But this works just fine as well. Adding the words "if necessary" I think is fine. But I'm going to go back to the same question that I feel like should be driving this whole entire discussion as we look at the audit, which is really, what is a successful outcome for us in this space? There's been one thing so far that I feel, two questions that we've needed clarity on, where we've gone back to this rule and said, well, we're not sure. One is, who appoints a superintendent, or does the superintendent appoint an on-the-ground superintendent, or is that the board? The second question is, who really gives input and oversees with this strategic plan? Is it an arm of the USBE strategic plan, or is it a completely separate document as a separate agency versus a department of USBE. Those are two questions that we need clarified. If we go back to the legislature, will a code change give us what we're considering success? Or will it just play with the language more again when we're looking for clarity in these specific areas? I guess that's the question that this committee needs to answer.
Well, you may need to add to your motion regarding the lines in code that allow that specifically direct the board to appoint the superintendent. Because that provides us little flexibility.
And yet with the piece in code in 31 and 32, it puts USDB as an arm under the agency. So the organizational structure beyond the top level superintendent then becomes subject to the agency manager. So those pieces need to be clarified. So, if we need to reference the other piece of code, we can, but it still comes back to the question in 31 and 32 between agency and separate, between USBE and separate agency language.
Member Booth, please speak up here.
Thank you. I feel, just listening to the code as it's just been read back to us, that as a part of USBE, that the board plays the function that they normally play with USBE, and that is that we hire the superintendent of public instruction for the state. And just as that superintendent decides who is going to play all of the various roles within USBE, she would, in the case Dr. Hart would decide what individual would take leadership and be the superintendent of the school for the deaf and blind, or a deputy superintendent or an associate superintendent or whatever, but with specific responsibility for the deaf and blind in just the same way that an associate superintendent for operations or assistant superintendent functions within the agency, and that she would choose that individual, and the board would be supportive of that part of the agency in the same way that they are supportive of every other part of the agency. And I think this was an idea that was floated by Dr. Hart in our recent meeting. And as I've thought about it more, looked at code and rule, I don't see any reason why we would not want to proceed with that kind of governance, and we don't have to be stepping in, overseeing every single decision that's made at this level. Maybe there will be a board that's organized in the same way that a local board is organized, and maybe it's that advisory council that works with the assistant superintendent for the schools for the deaf and blind in managing and bringing input from constituents and from parents, from the local communities that we service across the state. But because of our statewide reach with this school, I think it only makes sense to be a part of USBE, which has a statewide responsibility to interact and interface with all of the LEAs and charters in meeting the needs of our students. And I think the needs of our students and meeting those in the most efficient and effective way possible is still our primary mission, and our strategic plan would be pointing towards that mission and the accomplishment of that mission in the most effective way. Thank you.
Thank you. Appreciate that. Member Davis, do you have any Any response?
I have a question, yes. And this is where I see now why you are saying we may have to reference the other piece of code that says that we appoint the USDB superintendent. Because I really appreciated what Member Booth was saying, and it made me ask this question. Does that authority that Member Booth is saying should go to Superintendent Hart, does that authority come from us because we appointed her as the state USBE superintendent? Or does that authority come because we appointed her as the USDB superintendent? Because in fact, we have done both. So so thinking through all the things that Member Booth said, and those were really helpful to flesh this out in my mind. What if we had appointed Bob Smith? That's a made up name if there's a Bob Smith out there. What if we had appointed Bob Smith to be the USDB superintendent? Now, where would we be? Would Bob Smith have authority to do whatever with the separate agency and still be reporting to our USBE superintendent and deputy superintendent of finance because they both have responsibilities? Or would State Superintendent Hart have the authority to remove Bob Smith, even though we had appointed, or would she just appoint Bob Smith? These are the questions I think we need to clarify.
Follow-up comment.
Yes, please.
So I think we were smart and we didn't appoint
Okay, Bob
Smith
Smith.
because we knew that Dr. Hart really has this covered. I have full confidence in the ability of our agency to bring all of the know-how and the support and the listening ear and the research and the consideration of data to sort all of this out and to create an organization that is totally in compliance and totally up to speed in every regard of the code and rule that is already in place and which may be put in place as a result of the work group and other recommendations that are coming forward. But the fact that we have the opportunity to find out if it really can function in a magnificent way as a part of the agency because of our statewide reach is now possible because we didn't appoint Bob Smith. We appointed Molly Hart, and we appointed her doubly. We already appointed her as the overall superintendent, and we said, and if that's not enough, you're also the superintendent for the school, this interim superintendent for the schools for the deaf and the blind. So any way you look at it, if we need to appoint you again for some other reason, we can think of that, ruminate a little bit and see if there's another reason we should appoint you. But it all, I think, goes right back to Molly Hart, who's trying her darndest to come up with the best solutions, just like she is in every other Department of Public Education in the agency. And I would just be so excited to get behind her with our support and our best efforts to understand as she continues to research and to work with our wonderful Dr. Patton and Dr. Tanner in finding the solutions that are going to meet all of the best needs of our students that we're privileged to service across the state and in our deaf and blind facilities.
Quick follow-up, Chair.
Yes, please.
If we do move forward with what Vice Chair Booth is suggesting, then we would have to ask for a code change. Because Vice Chair Booth, help me if I'm understanding what you're saying right. What you're saying is you're leaning more toward the first part in lines 31 and 32, which says that USDB is now part of the entity of USBE. And so under Superintendent Hart, she appoints, deputies and assistants in a variety of areas. And just like that, she would appoint the on-the-ground superintendent for USDB as part of that organizational structure. And that person would report to her if it isn't also her, because she's only there until the end of December unless we change something. If we do go that way, then we really do have to change code in line 78 here that says the state board shall appoint a superintendent for the Utah schools for the deaf and the blind, which is in a separate place from the code that we're talking about. So we've got to keep that in mind. If we moved forward, I'm not sure that I don't know how the whole board, I just don't know. But other people have their hands up, but these are questions that I'm having. But I think I understand what you're saying, Vice Chair Booth. If we did go that way, we would have to ask for a code change.
Superintendent Hart.
So to me, the difference is, and take me out, like, just don't think about the superintendent for public instruction who happens to be me right now, and hopefully for a long time. Do you want the boots on the ground people to fall under USBE, the agency side, or do you want them to be autonomously under a superintendent that may not be, that is separate from USBE, the agency structure? In my view, what has been missing is that USDB is more of an island, maybe, that USBE, the board, administers, but there hasn't been a tether. There hasn't been a guide rope attached to the agency. And what legislation did is it added a tether in terms of finance, and it also indicated, it added the tether when it said a subdivision of the state board, but it didn't clarify in that it didn't take out the language that insinuated in another part of code that there was a superintendent that was appointed as an island. So the question for the board is, does the board want USDB to be part of the agency structure in order to give it strength and continuity and more attention, more of a tether? Or does it like its current structure where the superintendent and everybody at USDB is more free floating? I don't know if that, I've struggled on how to describe this, but to me, in my estimation, what both the code and and the audits and the information that has been studied is that USDB, while it is a school, needs to be more closely tethered to the agency, to the workings of the agency, the structures that the agency provides, because it doesn't have those structures on its own. It is very small when you think of it, how many students are served, and it's spread very widely throughout the state. What seems to be missing in its history is connection to the agency. And so I'm advising, my advice is to move it under the agency so there is more oversight programmatically than there has been ever in its history. I hope that makes some sort of sense, because it certainly, I took a lot of time.
Member Booth.
Thank you, Chair. So I want us to remember that the local education agencies across the state have responsibility for the students within their catchment area, within their district. And they don't have state responsibilities, statewide responsibilities. They're doing all they can just to service the people that are right there within their area. The schools for the deaf and blind, on the other hand, have our campuses, but they also have interface with students that are in every imaginable district across the state. It is the state school of the deaf and blind. It's not just the school as a separate entity. This is a state level service with responsibility for students across the state, requiring that this state school interface with all of the LEAs and charters and anybody across the state who have students that may need services or may need support in order to meet their educational needs. And so because of that state responsibility, statewide responsibility, I feel that they can function magnificently as a separate entity under the USBE. And they would have, someone who's responsible at the state office, USBE office, who, interfaces, interacts, asks questions, gets support, gives reports to the superintendent of public instruction and on occasion to the board, just as any of the statewide departments of our agency often come with agenda items and need direction or support from the board. But primarily the work will continue under the direction of the superintendent of public instruction through the appointed associate or assistant superintendent for the state school of the deaf and blind, and we'll meet those needs and be able to interface just as we do with all of the state LEAs throughout the course of the year in every other matter. So those are just a few of my thoughts at this moment. Thanks.
All right, so Member Davis said you had some questions in the chat. So you're asking, how does it work with the finance department currently? Deputy Jones reports directly to the board, but is part of the agency. If under the agency, would the superintendent report to USBE superintendent? Deputy Jones, was financial ops mentioned in code? Yeah, but the code was very specific to it. The finances being moved under, as I recall.
So would that create a bifurcated situation where whoever the superintendent is kind of like half reporting to Superintendent Hart and half reporting to Deputy Jones based on language in the code? And additional language in the code that says that superintendent reports to us because we appoint the superintendent. So right now there's like a triple, this poor person there's a triple.
No man can serve two masters or three.
That's right.
Dr. Tanner.
I was just going to weigh in on the discussion. So I appreciate what Board Member Booth is saying, because I kind of see it the same way, the way that he is describing it. I see someone who is reporting to the superintendent of public instruction, which is currently Dr. Hart. I know that Dr. Hart works closely with Scott Jones to manage the budget. So I would see that that relationship could also occur with USDB, where we're working closely with them. There is no reason to serve two masters if we're all unified and under one whole. So we would be under Dr. Hart's purview, or the role would be, and then we would work and consult directly with the financial operations department to run the finances that we need to and have the oversight that is necessary for the financial operations. And I see it as a group of people working for the same goal. And so I would think that would be how I would perceive that to be. I wouldn't think it would make sense to put the superintendent of USDB under the finance director, because finance is a piece of the puzzle, but primarily that expertise needs to be about the children and the students and the roles and the IDEA. There's a lot of other things that are very important for that role. So that would be my 2 cents on that. And I appreciate the discussion. I see it more like Board Member Booth has described.
Thank you, Dr. Tanner. All right, let's go back to the motion sheet.
Yeah,
Does
Chair
any
Wood,
of us-
I wonder if we need to change our motion. Quite frankly, just with all of this input, because what we really need is structure. Who's appointing whom? Who is reporting to whom? Which pieces of code support that or need to be changed? That's what we need, in my opinion. So maybe we need to have Superintendent Hart and Deputy Jones and staff kind of working on language, and our AAGs working on all of that.
And bring that back to us.
And just bring it back to us for consideration.
Well, that's what I did. And I suggested it. So, but
not with the code changes or supports.
Oh, okay. So you want suggestions on code changes?
Yes, because the code is what makes it convoluted.
So if we had code that said the state superintendent of public instruction shall serve as the superintendent of the Utah schools for the deaf and blind, the superintendent shall appoint an assistant superintendent. And clarify me if I'm on the wrong level, because I know there are all the different levels. The assistant superintendent of the Utah schools for the deaf and blind shall, subject to the approval of the state board, then appoint the associate superintendents for the deaf and the blind. So what changes is that so we still appoint, so we take away that appoint, because we already appoint the superintendent over here, and they shall serve as the superintendent of the Utah schools for the deaf and blind, but we allow the superintendent to appoint an assistant superintendent. Now that assistant superintendent serves over here with that single autonomy that's already in 31 and 32.
I mean, that sounds like what I'm hearing is the will of the group so far, but I don't know that it will be the will of the full board, but we can suggest it. And then there's we understand what we understand, but financial ops is specifically called out in code. So I think, we've got to work it out so that we're all on the same page. The legislature, the USBE, and the agencies, both USDB and USBE. I won't speak any more this meeting because I've spoken way too much.
I guess I would ask Dr. Hart, does that mess up anything with financial ops?
No, because remember that was settled out with it being a subdivision of the state.
Right.
So that actually is the clearest part, is that it's a subdivision and that USBE financial ops, or it's not on the screen right now, but the finances are handled through, if they would have done the same thing on the operational side, we wouldn't be having this conversation. And I just want to be, so the state board approves the annual budget and administers the financial operations of the Utah schools for the deaf and the blind. That's clear. The board does exactly what they do for the agency. It's in alignment. To me, you have two choices. I mean, you could, I guess, go off into somewhere else, but either either the USBE, USDB falls under the agency programmatically, or it doesn't. Programmatically, it has not fallen under the agency in its history. So it's programmatically that has resided all over with the superintendent for USDB. So you're either choosing status quo, where you appoint a superintendent, someone else, some person B, and they determine what they need. That's what has always happened. That's historical. Or you adopt an alternate structure, which puts USDB programmatically under the USBE, the agency. So do you want to go that way, so that not just the financial, but the programmatic is under USBE? Or do you want that only tether to be that financial services? And everything in the audit says that there should be a tether for the program side, that it's not enough to do the finance, because in the audit, competency, accountability, policy, and data, which cross over into the programmatic side, are listed as risk areas. So do you want to ignore those risk areas and let USBE handle just the finances and hope that that's enough? Or do you want to add that tether? And I hate to call it a tether. I'm just picturing a boat and I'm thinking of a boat and a dock, quite frankly. Do you want that connection there, that control environment sitting on the program side too? And if we pay attention to the audit, the answer would be yes. But it's up to the will of the board. Do they want status quo, or do they want to try an adjusted structure?
All right, we're at noon. Member Booth, you did have your hand up. Did you have any final say on this before we have the motion, tentative motion on clarifying in rule? I don't know that we'd have to clarify in rule if we look at a change of structure in terms of the superintendent, but that would be a legislative change. So just some guidance.
I would like to suggest a substitute motion.
Okay.
That we recommend from this committee to the full board that we adopt and support the suggestions made by our interim superintendent of schools for the deaf and blind, and that we allow that implementation to move forward in order to meet the requirements of the audit, which not only required that we bring our financial systems into place, but that our programmatic systems also receive the attention and support that USBE can provide as we move forward, meeting the needs of students.
Okay. Could we add into it the recommended language changes to the legislature, which would align with those recommendations then?
You bet. I mean, yes, excellent. Good idea.
Because I think in the end, that's what will have, probably have to happen. Maybe not.
Vice Chair Wood, this is Deputy Superintendent Voorhees. So
can you just guide me in where you want the language to go from
So
here?
you
Or
can
where?
delete that the committee recommend the staff and put in the language that's there.
Here?
Yeah, that would be deleted. Keep all of that paragraph.
Yeah, but what about this language that board member Booth?
Yeah, so that would be the beginning of his motion, and then it would
Okay.
be in addition, recommend the following changes to statute.
In addition, recommend, and then put this.
No, down below, do you see the state superintendent of public instruction?
Yes.
That would
yes.
be, that's code, that would be code change if we,
Can I, could I respectfully ask that we take out the suggestions made by the interim superintendent of USDB and just
Yeah.
say, recommend that the full board adopt the requirements of the audit to bring? I kind of feel, I just brought a suggestion. I don't want to be,
And it was a dang good one.
well, thanks. It's the best suggestion that I have at the time, but I don't want it to be about anything about me. It's just my suggestion for the agency. The board can do what they feel is best.
so currently it reads, that I think that should say that the committee recommend that the full board adopt and support the requirements of the USDB audit to bring both financial and programmatic systems under the agency. In addition, recommend the following changes. I think we'd have to list code there,
Okay.
whatever it is now. The state superintendent of public instruction shall serve as the superintendent of the Utah schools for the deaf and blind. The superintendent shall appoint an assistant superintendent. Then the assistant superintendent shall, because right now it just says the superintendent shall. Does that work for you, Member Booth?
If that's what needs to change, absolutely. I just want to be supportive of and the comment a little bit, it's going to be hard to get full support from the board. Absolutely. That is a given. That to get full support from this board will be next to impossible. But that doesn't mean that this isn't the right motion. So I say, let's get ready and be prepared and provide them with the opportunity to discuss and have the right information given to them so that perhaps they can arrive at the best decision for our deaf and blind students in the state.
All right. I would love if Member Davis or Member Longacre have any comments to this before we take it to a vote.
No, I think this also sounds great.
Okay, Member Davis.
I have a question for CAE Davis. But I know we're at 12:05, so I don't know if we have time or not. But my question would be, should the language down there say that the state superintendent of public instruction serves as the superintendent of Utah schools for the deaf and blind, or simply that the state superintendent of public instruction is just that, but appoints an assistant superintendent as the superintendent of USDB? Because I think it's really confusing because it's, especially for everybody who reports up, but could CAE Davis weigh in on that?
Yes, please.
Okay, sure. So yes, Chief Audit Executive Debbie Davis. Of course, when internal audit is looking at code, the more clear that you can be, the more kind that is to everyone that reads the code and tries to interpret it. I don't give legal interpretation, of course, that would be your AAGs, but as one that does read the code, you would want to make sure in that language as clear as you can be. So if there is any question in your mind about what's currently written there, thinking, oh, this could be interpreted this way or that way, then potentially you might want to look at clarifying the language. Does that help?
Well, I'm asking you which is more clear based on what we need. to say the state superintendent of public instruction will assign or appoint an assistant superintendent to be the superintendent of USDB. See, this motion language right now is saying that the state superintendent is also the USDB superintendent.
Correct. So that goes to intent of the board, I would think. And if that's what's intended, that the state superintendent is also the superintendent of Utah Schools for the Deaf and Blind, then as is works. If it's intended that the state superintendent appoints an assistant superintendent who is then the superintendent, then that would need to be clarified.
Under your audit, which of these more closely reflects recommendations made in the audit?
Well, I think the recommendations in the audit really point out that the legislature, with the language that's currently there, has given the board quite a predicament, and it's confusing. So it's not clear. So the board could suggest either direction. I don't think the audit was saying it has to be this way or it has to be that way. It's saying you need to be clear, and currently the language in Utah Code is not clear.
So if we leave it this way, Chair, I would suggest the language that CAE Davis recommended, which is in that last line. It says the superintendent shall appoint an assistant superintendent of USBE
Of the Utah Schools for Deaf and
to
Blind.
be the superintendent of the Utah Schools for the Deaf and Blind.
Okay.
Do we need a separate superintendent?
Yes,
Why?
because those are two massive, huge jobs for one person to do. That's why we made it temporary,
Okay. So then
in my opinion.
we
Molly could address it.
then we eliminate the language above the state superintendent shall serve as the superintendent. That language would be eliminated.
No, not necessarily. Debbie said you could do it either way.
Well, now you have two superintendents this way, where I was looking at it more from the line of the superintendent is the superintendent of the state. This is a statewide agency. We've put it underneath. They are the superintendent, but we have an assistant superintendent who functions under the board.
As
So
the superintendent of USDB, for all intents and purposes, on the boots on the ground.
So then it would be to function as the superintendent.
Molly has a suggestion.
Yeah, go ahead, Superintendent Hart.
I think you're getting into the weeds on that, just personally. I think once you name the superintendent, I think you leave it up to the superintendent. They might envision it as more of a chief of staff position than an assistant superintendent position. Or they may, I think this is where code gets into trouble, is when they're overly prescriptive. I think at some level you need to let, and I realize this is coming out of my mouth, so take it for what it's worth. You need to let the person you need to let your leaders, build your bench and then trust the bench. And I just think you're getting into some weeds that may require changing in the future.
So, Superintendent, how would you suggest this language look?
You put a period after the deaf and blind, there is a period, and then you delete that sentence.
Okay.
May I?
Yeah, go ahead, Dr. Tanner.
So
Finish up.
I know we're running through, but that actually I think would be very problematic, because people are unaware of the fields, but there are superintendents of the deaf and blind in every state that they report in different structures, in different pieces and things. There are meetings of superintendents at schools for the deaf and blind that I don't think that the superintendent of public instruction would have the time to attend. There's lots of them that they occur because there are individuals that function in those roles. So however we say it here, I just think that would be very complicated for the field of deaf and blind education if we set that structure up. Well, they would.
Oh.
I get things all the time to try to understand our structure for example, CEASD or APH that they get on the other side. It's just, I just think that knowing the field, that would be very complicated for the field outside of USDB to understand.
I would name one. I just don't think that it should be in code.
But what she's saying is remove the sentence prior to the last sentence and just have you name the superintendent.
Oh, gotcha.
That's what I'm saying. You name who that is.
I gotcha.
But that you are not the superintendent of USDB, but you appoint who that individual is.
I gotcha. Okay, I was tracking. I wasn't tracking properly.
Are you comfortable with that, Superintendent Hart, if we remove the second to last sentence instead of the last sentence? So you are the superintendent of state instruction. You appoint an associate or assistant superintendent who is the superintendent of USDB.
Absolutely.
That makes more
sense.
sense.
The question that came up prior is, can a superintendent appoint a superintendent? And the answer that I wasn't able to get a definitive answer, but the answer I did get was from a drafter who said, "Don't quote me, but you can do whatever you want as long as it's in code."
Well, in code it says the board has to appoint. So.
Right.
We need to change that, but let's end. I think this is where we want it personally.
Okay, so it currently reads that the committee recommend that the full board adopt and support the requirements of the USDB audit to bring both financial and programmatic systems under the agency, and in addition recommend the following changes to code. The superintendent shall appoint an assistant superintendent of USBE to function as the superintendent of the USDB.
Yep.
I'm not seeing any. And then the assistant superintendent, do you want that language? The assistant superintendent will then be the person over, if they're functioning as a superintendent, they would be the person that would select those associate superintendents over the actual schools. Is that accurate?
If you want it to be.
Was that in your vision?
Well, that's the code right now. I was just looking at all the areas where
then we can just take that out. If that's code, then we can just take it out. If we're comfortable with whomever we appoint as the superintendent or whomever.
Yeah, I guess you would. It just says right now the superintendent of the schools. So I guess if they're functioning as the schools, then you wouldn't need it. So I guess take line 3 off. We'll just, I guess the drafters will decide whether or not you have to continue that out. Okay.
Can I just give you 2 sentences? Oops. Can I just give you 2 sentences to close out the rest of the audit? And then we'll have that item finished.
We have to vote on this.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Then you may. All right. All those in favor of the motion, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed?
Aye.
You are opposed to it, Cindy?
No. I'm a yes.
Okay.
I was just slow.
Sorry. Okay, so that passes unanimously. Okay. So Superintendent Hart, final words.
Yes, final words. So the only other item, data, as you can see in the audit, that goes throughout everything. That's a thread. Everything we've talked about addresses data. The last one that I wanted to bring up is policy, and the audit says the USDB should complete a risk assessment of critical functions and administrative tasks, and policy development should include a policy to ensure policies and procedures are updated. I just wanted this team to know that's the third leg of the 3-legged stool that I kind of, as how I'm conceptualizing leading USDB in the interim. So the first was structure, the second was internal controls, and the third is a policy analysis to get their, and then concentrating on writing policy to get their policies to where an LEA's policy should be and current, including a policy calendar for regular updating. So I just wanted this committee to have the full picture of what I'm doing as interim, and it's those 3 steps, those 3 buckets, so to speak, and they are the policy, working on a strategic plan structure with all other plans feeding into it, and the internal and setting up an internal control system. So those are the 3 things that I'm doing as your interim superintendent.
Thank you, Superintendent Hart, and thank you for walking us through here today. I see future meetings where we review new policies that are going to be written. I see a deeper dive into the role of the Advisory Council and the Education Foundation and some of those additional buckets of funding that we may have input on. So I appreciate, thank you for staying the extra time so that we could work that out. Is there any other comments? If not, I'll seek another motion.
Move to adjourn.
Okay, we have a motion to adjourn. All in favor, say aye.
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 Any opposed? Thank you all very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Chair.
Much.